14 years. That's how long we'd built our lives together, brick by brick, memory by memory. 14 years of laughter bouncing off quiet walls, arguments that ended in muttered apologies, and a love so steady it felt like gravity itself. We weren't perfect, no one ever is. But we were us, and that was enough. Until it wasn't. It happened in one night, a single, shattering moment that unraveled everything I thought I knew about us. One confession, spoken softly but landing like a thunderclap, changed the course of both our lives forever. 14 years, I would later think, staring at the cracks in the ceiling above our bed. How could 14 years feel so fragile? The story of us began on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in a coffee shop tucked between two towering office buildings downtown. I didn't believe in love at first sight, not then, but there was something about the way she stood at the counter, her hair damp from the rain, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her cup as if lost in thought. She glanced over when my phone buzzed loudly against the wooden table. Our eyes met briefly before she turned away, but even that fleeting connection lingered like static electricity. I remember thinking she looked tired, dark circles under her warm brown eyes, a slight slump to her shoulders, but there was also strength etched into the lines around her mouth. When I finally approached her after finishing my drink, she almost dropped her book in surprise. "You're reading The Night Circus," I said, pointing at the cover. My voice came out steadier than I expected, low and warm, like honey drizzled over toast. "That's one of my favorites." We talked for nearly 3 hours that day, moving from the cramped cafe to a nearby park bench where the rain had left puddles shimmering like broken mirrors. She told me about her job as a photographer, her struggles with self-doubt, and her obsession with old jazz records. In turn, I shared stories about growing up in the city, my passion for design, and my fear of failure, a detail I regretted confessing almost immediately. By the time we exchanged numbers, the sky had cleared, and the air smelled fresh and alive. Our relationship grew slowly, naturally, like ivy climbing a brick wall. There were no grand gestures or dramatic declarations of love, just quiet moments strung together like beads on a necklace. We cooked dinner side by side in her tiny apartment, danced barefoot in the living room to old records, and took weekend road trips to nowhere in particular. Each memory became a brick in the foundation of our life together. But foundations aren't always solid. Sometimes they settle unevenly, develop cracks, or hide weaknesses beneath the surface. Looking back now, I wonder if I missed the signs, or chose not to see them. 3 years into our relationship, we bought a house together, a modest bungalow on the outskirts of the city with peeling paint and creaky floorboards. It wasn't much to look at, but it was ours. Over the next decade, we poured ourselves into it, literally and figuratively. Every weekend was spent sanding, painting, or planting flowers in the garden. Slowly, the house transformed into a reflection of us, cozy yet imperfect, filled with mismatched furniture and shelves overflowing with books and photographs. One of my favorite spots was the kitchen window, which overlooked the backyard. On sunny mornings, I'd sit there with a cup of coffee, watching her tinker with the vegetable patch or chase squirrels away from the bird feeder. She always swore those squirrels were plotting against her, and I'd laugh until tears streamed down my face. Those moments felt eternal, like nothing could ever disrupt the rhythm of our days. Yet even in paradise, storms brew unnoticed. I never realized how much I relied on routine, the predictability of waking up to the smell of pancakes cooking, the sound of her footsteps padding down the hallway, the way she hummed off-key while brushing her hair. Change terrified me, though I rarely admitted it aloud. And maybe that fear blinded me to the subtle shifts happening within our walls. The cracks began appearing long before the confession, though I refused to acknowledge them. They started small, a missed date night here, a forgotten anniversary there. A sharp word exchanged during a stressful week. A lingering silence when she asked me how work was going. At the time, I chalked it up to life getting in the way. After all, everyone has bad days, right? But looking back, I realize how often I ignored the warning signs. Like the night I found myself sitting alone in the dark, staring out the window with a glass of whiskey in hand. "Are you okay?" she asked, sinking onto the couch beside me. I forced a smile and nodded, but my mind stayed distant, haunted. "Just thinking," I murmured, swirling the amber liquid. She wanted to press further, to demand answers, but instead she kissed my cheek and retreated to bed. Cowardice masquerading as patience. She left for California on a whim, chasing something she couldn't quite name. "I need space," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "Time to breathe." I nodded, pretending to understand, though deep down, I wondered if I'd failed her somehow, if I hadn't been enough to keep her here. Her journey began as an adventure, just her and the open road stretching endlessly before her. She called me every evening, her voice buoyant with stories of sunsets over deserts and roadside diners where strangers became friends. It was freeing, she said. Liberating. For the first time in years, she sounded happy. But then came the breakdown. Her car sputtered to a halt outside a small town she'd never heard of. Frustrated but determined, she found a hotel, booked a room, and settled in for the night, waiting for the mechanics to fix her vehicle by morning. And then, fate stepped in. The day she packed her bags, the house felt eerily silent, as though even the walls were holding their breath. Every zip of her suitcase echoed louder than it should have, each item she placed inside representing another piece of our life together being tucked away. Clothes, books, toiletries, all mundane objects, yet weighted with meaning. "I'm not running away," she said suddenly, breaking the quiet. She stood by the doorway, gripping the strap of her bag tightly. I need to figure things out." "I know," I replied, my throat tight. But did I? Did I truly understand what she needed, or was I too caught up in my own guilt to see clearly? When she finally walked out the door, I didn't follow. Instead, I watched from the window as she loaded her car, her movements brisk and purposeful. The engine roared to life, and then she was gone, disappearing down the driveway and around the corner. Just like that, the silence swallowed me whole. For days afterward, I wandered through the empty rooms, half expecting her to walk through the door at any moment. Her absence was palpable, a void that seemed to grow larger with each passing hour. In the kitchen, her favorite mug sat untouched on the counter. On the bedside table, her book lay open where she'd left it, the pages slightly curled. Everywhere I looked, reminders of her lingered, taunting me with questions I couldn't answer. Had I pushed her away without realizing it? Was this my punishment for the mistakes I'd made? Her nightly calls provided some comfort, albeit fleeting. Hearing her voice helped ease the ache, even if only temporarily. Still, there was a distance between us now, not just physical, but emotional. Each conversation ended with promises to talk again soon, but when the line went dead, the loneliness crept back in like shadows lengthening at dusk. Out on the highway, freedom tasted different than she'd imagined. It wasn't the carefree exhilaration she'd envisioned, instead, it carried a bittersweet tang, like biting into an apple only to find it bruised beneath the skin. The vast expanse of desert stretched endlessly before her, golden sands shimmering under the relentless sun. Cacti dotted the landscape like sentinels guarding secrets older than time itself. She rolled down the window, letting the warm wind tousle her hair, and tried to focus on the beauty surrounding her rather than the turmoil within. Each mile marker passed brought fresh reflections. Memories flooded her mind unbidden, moments shared, arguments weathered, dreams deferred. She thought about the photographs lining the hallway at home, snapshots of vacations, birthdays, lazy Sundays spent doing nothing at all. Those images had once represented permanence, proof that love could withstand anything. Now they felt fragile, like Polaroids left too long in the sun, their colors fading with time. At a roadside diner somewhere in Arizona, she struck up a conversation with an elderly couple seated nearby. They spoke of travels across continents, of lessons learned and lives lived fully. "Sometimes you gotta lose yourself to find yourself," the woman said with a knowing smile. Her words stuck with her long after the meal ended, resonating deeply as she resumed her journey. By the third day, the novelty of solitude began to wear thin. Nights spent alone in motels grew lonelier, the hum of crickets outside her window amplifying the silence inside. She missed the sound of his laugh, the warmth of his arms wrapped around her as they drifted off to sleep. Yet, despite the ache, she couldn't deny the sense of liberation coursing through her veins. For the first time in years, she felt untethered, free to explore not just the world but also herself. It happened unexpectedly, just as she reached the outskirts of a tiny town whose name she barely registered, Maple Ridge, according to the faded sign at the edge of the highway. One moment, her car purred smoothly along the asphalt, the next, it sputtered violently before coming to a grinding halt. Smoke curled lazily from beneath the hood as she pulled onto the shoulder, her heart pounding. "Of course," she muttered, slamming the steering wheel in frustration. This couldn't be happening, not now, not here. She popped the hood and peered underneath, though she had no idea what she was looking at. Wires, hoses, and mysterious components stared back mockingly, offering no solutions. A tow truck arrived within the hour, driven by a grizzled man named Hank who introduced himself with a tip of his baseball cap. "Looks like your radiator gave out," he said after inspecting the damage. "You'll need to get it fixed before you can hit the road again." Defeated, she followed his advice and checked into the only hotel in town, a quaint establishment called the Maple Inn. Its exterior boasted flower boxes overflowing with petunias, while inside, the lobby smelled faintly of lavender and polished wood. The receptionist, a kindly woman named Margaret, greeted her warmly and handed over a key to room 6. Exhausted, she collapsed onto the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling above. Tomorrow would bring repairs, delays, uncertainty. For tonight, however, she allowed herself to simply exist, suspended in limbo between past and future. Morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the gauzy curtains. After grabbing coffee from the diner next door, she headed to the mechanic shop, where a young man named Ethan greeted her with a shy smile. He wore grease-stained overalls and carried himself with an easy confidence that put her at ease. While waiting for updates, she wandered aimlessly through Maple Ridge, discovering its hidden charms. A bookstore tucked behind ivy-covered walls. A farmer's market buzzing with activity. An art gallery showcasing local talent. Each discovery felt like a gift, unexpected yet profoundly meaningful. That evening, as she browsed paintings at the gallery, she met Clara, a painter whose vibrant landscapes captured the essence of the region. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on art, travel, and life's unpredictability. By the time they parted ways, Clara had invited her to dinner the following night, insisting she meet more of the townsfolk. As she returned to the Maple Inn, she realized something remarkable. For the first time since leaving home, she didn't feel lost. Perhaps fate had intervened after all, not to punish her, but to guide her toward rediscovery. Over the next few days, Maple Ridge worked its magic. Surrounded by kind strangers turned friends, she began piecing together fragments of herself she hadn't realized were missing. Conversations with Clara sparked new insights about creativity and resilience. Late-night strolls under starlit skies reminded her of the infinite possibilities life held. Yet, amidst the healing, questions lingered. What awaited her back home? Could she forgive him, and herself, for the pain they'd caused each other? Or was this newfound clarity signaling a permanent shift, one that meant walking away for good? For now, answers remained elusive. But as she stood on the porch of the Maple Inn, watching the horizon glow with the promise of dawn, she knew one thing for certain: whatever lay ahead, she was ready to face it. She had been idly flipping through brochures at the front desk when the poster caught her eye, a stark black-and-white image of the Grim Reaper's lead singer, his piercing gaze staring straight ahead, framed by jagged letters spelling out their name. Beneath it, bold text announced, "In residence at the Maple Inn, 1 week only." Her breath hitched. For years, their songs had been her constant companions, anthems of rebellion during high school, solace during lonely college nights, and even comfort during arguments with him. Their lyrics spoke to her soul in ways few things ever had. And now, here they were, mere feet away, breathing the same air as her in this tiny town. For a moment, she wondered if she should leave. Surely, running into them would complicate an already fragile state of mind. But curiosity won out. She lingered near the poster, tracing the edges with her fingertips before heading to the bar. Maybe fate really had brought her here, for reasons she couldn't yet understand. The bar buzzed with low chatter and the clink of glasses. She perched on a stool, ordering a whiskey sour, the kind he hated because it reminded him of pretentious cocktail bars, but tonight, she didn't care. As she sipped, she scanned the room, half expecting to see them walk in. And then they did. They entered together, laughing loudly, their presence magnetic. The lead singer, Asher Kane, led the group, his leather jacket slung casually over one shoulder. His bandmates trailed behind, equally charismatic but less imposing. They took seats not far from her, close enough that she could hear snippets of their conversation. Her heart raced. Should she approach? Say something? Before she could decide, Asher glanced her way, catching her staring. He smiled, a slow, knowing grin, and raised his glass in acknowledgement. She flushed but returned the gesture awkwardly. Moments later, he slid onto the stool beside her. "You're the one who's been listening to our music all your life, aren't you?" he asked, his tone teasing but warm. She blinked, startled. How could he possibly know? Yeah, she stammered. "Your albums got me through some tough times." He nodded thoughtfully, signaling the bartender for another round. "Well, we owe you a drink then. What's your story?" Thus began a night unlike any other. Conversation flowed effortlessly, fueled by alcohol and mutual admiration. They shared stories of tours gone wrong, fans gone wild, and the bittersweet nature of fame. She found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, about her struggles, her journey, her fractured relationship. They listened intently, offering advice that felt oddly profound coming from rock stars. By midnight, the line between fan and friend had blurred completely. It wasn't planned. Not consciously, anyway. As the hours slipped by, the energy shifted. The playful banter turned intimate, the glances lingering just a second too long. When Asher suggested moving the party upstairs, to one of their suites, she hesitated only briefly before nodding. Rational thought abandoned her, replaced by a reckless desire to feel alive again. In the suite, surrounded by guitars, empty bottles, and dim lighting, the boundaries dissolved entirely. She kissed him first, or maybe he kissed her, memory blurred under the haze of liquor and adrenaline. All she knew was that it happened, and once it started, stopping seemed impossible. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets stained with ink and sweat, reality crept back in. Panic bubbled in her chest as she realized what she'd done. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal. Of him. Of herself. Of everything she thought she stood for. She dressed quickly, mumbling apologies that went unanswered, and fled the room before dawn broke. Outside, the cool morning air slapped her awake, forcing her to confront the enormity of her actions. Back at home, weeks later, she still couldn't shake the shame. Every glance in the mirror reminded her of the person she'd become, someone unrecognizable, someone capable of hurting the man she loved most. Their phone calls grew strained. She avoided questions about her trip, deflecting with vague answers about sunsets and small towns. But secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface. Finally, unable to bear the weight any longer, she called him. Her voice trembled as she recounted the story, not sparing herself, not seeking forgiveness, simply needing to confess. "I don't know what came over me," she said, choking on the words. "I didn't plan it. I swear." On the other end of the line, silence stretched endlessly. She braced herself for anger, accusations, anything. Instead, he spoke softly, almost detached. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because I owe you the truth," she replied. "Even if it destroys us." The days following the confession felt like walking through quicksand. Neither of them knew how to move forward. He retreated inward, shutting her out emotionally while pretending nothing had changed. She tried reaching out, apologizing repeatedly, but her words bounced off walls he refused to let her breach. Meanwhile, memories of that night haunted her. Songs by the Grim Reaper played everywhere, in stores, on radios, in her head. Each lyric carried new meaning, taunting her with reminders of what she'd lost. Yet amid the chaos, clarity emerged. She realized that running away hadn't solved her problems, it had only created new ones. Facing those demons, her fears, insecurities, doubts, was the only path to healing. Whether it meant salvaging their relationship or starting anew remained uncertain. But one thing was clear, she couldn't keep running. The days that followed were a storm without end. Pain clawed at my chest, sharp and unrelenting. Disbelief warred with anger, grief tangled with guilt. How could this happen? How could she do this? Wasn't our love supposed to be unshakable? Yet beneath it all, stubborn and undeniable, was love. Love that refused to let go, even when every fiber of my being screamed to walk away. Love that reminded me of the promises we'd made, not just in joy, but in struggle. Love that whispered, faintly but insistently, "Fight for her." Still, forgiveness didn't come easily. Nights stretched into eternity as I stared at the ceiling, replaying the same questions over and over. Could I still trust her? Could I look at her without seeing the shadow of that night? Could I forgive not just her, but myself, for doubting, for failing to see the signs? Betrayal has a way of hollowing you out, leaving behind an emptiness so vast it feels impossible to fill. For days, I moved through life like a ghost, performing mundane tasks by rote while my mind churned endlessly. Simple acts, brushing my teeth, pouring coffee, answering emails, felt mechanical, disconnected from any real sense of purpose. Everywhere I turned, reminders of her lingered. Her favorite mug sat untouched on the counter. Her scarf hung forgotten on the coat rack. Even the air seemed heavy with her absence, thick with memories of laughter and arguments and quiet moments shared. Each reminder twisted the knife deeper, reopening wounds I thought would heal but never did. I oscillated between rage and despair. One moment, I wanted to scream at her, demand answers she couldn't possibly give. The next, I crumpled under the weight of my own inadequacies, wondering if I had driven her to this, to him. Had I been too distant? Too preoccupied with work? Too blind to notice the cracks forming in our foundation? But alongside the pain simmered something else, love. Not the giddy, effortless kind we'd once known, but a stubborn, aching devotion that refused to die. It haunted me, whispering truths I wasn't ready to face, that she was still the person I loved most in the world, flaws and all. That walking away might hurt more than staying. That forgiveness, though impossibly distant, was worth fighting for. She called often during those weeks, her voice trembling with equal parts apology and desperation. "I'm so sorry," she repeated, over and over, until the words lost meaning. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I need you to know I regret it. Every second." Sometimes I listened silently, letting her pour out her guilt without interruption. Other times, I snapped, unleashing pent-up frustration in bursts of anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I shouted once, my voice cracking. "You destroyed everything." "I know," she sobbed. "Believe me, I know." Her confession revealed fragments of her own torment. She spoke of sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment she crossed the line. Of waking up each morning dreading the inevitable confrontation. Of hating herself for hurting the one person who mattered most. It wasn't about him, she insisted, her tone raw with emotion. It wasn't even about us. It was about me, about feeling lost and broken and desperate for something to hold on to. And I grabbed onto the wrong thing. Her words stirred conflicting emotions within me. Part of me wanted to believe her, to accept that she hadn't acted out of malice but out of confusion and pain. Another part recoiled, unable to reconcile her actions with the woman I thought I knew. We met once, in a neutral space, a park bench overlooking the river where we used to sit together. Autumn leaves swirled around us, painting the ground in shades of gold and crimson. She arrived first, clutching a cup of coffee in trembling hands. When I approached, she stood quickly, her eyes searching mine for some sign of hope. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I almost didn't," I replied honestly. We sat in silence for a while, watching the water ripple under the pale sunlight. Neither of us knew where to begin. Finally, she spoke, her words halting but sincere. "I don't know how to fix this. Maybe it can't be fixed. But I want you to know I'm trying. I'm here." Her vulnerability caught me off guard. In that moment, she wasn't the woman who had betrayed me, she was simply human, flawed, fragile, and terrified of losing the one thing she valued most. "I don't know if I can trust you again," I said finally, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "And maybe that's unfair. But trust isn't something you can ask for, it's something you earn." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. And I'll wait however long it takes." Friends and family weighed in, offering advice that ranged from pragmatic to impractical. My best friend urged me to cut ties completely. "You deserve better," he said firmly. "Someone who won't break your heart." My sister, ever the optimist, encouraged patience. "People make mistakes," she reminded me gently. "Doesn't mean they don't love you." Meanwhile, her mother called me unexpectedly one evening, her voice filled with concern. "She's falling apart," she confessed. "I've never seen her like this. Please, just consider giving her another chance." These voices added layers of complexity to an already fraught situation. While some pushed me toward closure, others tugged at my conscience, urging me to reconsider. Ultimately, the decision rested with me, and no amount of outside influence could ease the burden of choice. Slowly, tentatively, we began rebuilding. It started small, text messages checking in, shared meals at restaurants neither of us associated with happier times, walks through neighborhoods neither of us had visited before. Each interaction felt fragile, like stepping on thin ice, but gradually, cracks began to mend. One evening, as we sat side by side on the couch, she reached for my hand. Her touch startled me, sending a jolt of electricity through my arm. For a moment, I considered pulling away, but instead, I held on, feeling the warmth of her palm against mine. "I miss you," she murmured, her voice breaking. "Not just the person I fell in love with, but the life we built together. I want that back, if you'll let me try." Her honesty disarmed me. It wasn't a promise of perfection or an assurance that mistakes wouldn't happen again. It was simply a plea, an acknowledgement of what we'd lost and a desire to reclaim it. "I miss you too," I admitted softly, surprising myself with the admission. "But it's going to take time." She nodded, squeezing my hand gently. "I know. And I'll wait." In that moment, forgiveness still felt distant, but not impossible. Like a seed planted in rocky soil, it required care, patience, and faith to grow. Whether it would bloom remained uncertain. But for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to hope. In the end, forgiveness wasn't about deserving. It wasn't about erasing what had happened or pretending it didn't matter. It was about choosing love, not the idealized version of it, but the messy, complicated reality. Real love doesn't demand perfection, it embraces flaws, mistakes, and humanity. I forgave her because I needed to free myself from the weight of bitterness that threatened to consume me. Because after 14 years, I realized that what we had was bigger than a single moment of weakness. Because despite everything, she was still the person I had chosen, the person I still wanted to choose. Love isn't about forgetting, I told her one night, my voice thick with emotion. It's about remembering, and deciding to stay anyway. Forgiveness didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Some days felt lighter, hopeful even. Other days plunged us back into darkness, where old wounds reopened and doubts lingered like shadows. She started therapy, encouraged by her mother and reluctantly supported by me. At first, I questioned whether it was necessary. After all, hadn't we already talked enough? But over time, I began to see changes in her. She spoke more openly about her fears, her insecurities, and the reasons behind her actions. Therapy gave her tools to navigate guilt and shame, helping her untangle the web of emotions that had led her astray. For my part, I sought solace in routine. Mornings spent jogging along familiar paths, evenings spent reading books I'd neglected during our tumultuous months apart. These small rituals grounded me, offering a sense of control amidst chaos. Yet no amount of running or reading could silence the questions gnawing at my mind. Was I making the right choice? Could I truly move past this? Our conversations became less about blame and more about understanding. We revisited painful memories not to dwell on them but to find meaning within them. Why do you think it happened? I asked her once, my tone softer than before. I don't know, she admitted, tears pooling in her eyes. Maybe I felt trapped. Maybe I thought I could escape who I was becoming. Or maybe I just forgot how much I loved us. Her honesty disarmed me. For so long, I'd seen her betrayal as an act of rejection, but hearing her say those words reminded me of something important. She hadn't stopped loving me. She'd simply lost sight of why we mattered. Even as progress unfolded, doubt crept in uninvited. There were nights when sleep eluded me, haunted by visions of her with him, the lead singer whose name I couldn't bear to hear anymore. What had they talked about? Laughed about? Shared? Each unanswered question festered like an open wound. One evening, unable to shake the unease, I confronted her. Do you ever think about him? I asked abruptly, catching her off guard. She froze, her fork hovering mid-air above her plate. No, she said finally, meeting my gaze. Not like that. Not anymore. Her answer should have reassured me, but instead, it left me questioning whether she was being truthful or simply trying to protect me. Trust, I realized, wasn't something that returned overnight. It was earned slowly, painfully, through consistent effort and transparency. Other doubts surfaced too. Would we ever recapture the intimacy we'd once shared? Could I look at her without seeing the shadow of that night? And perhaps most terrifyingly, what if this happened again? These fears weren't unfounded, but neither were they insurmountable. With every passing day, we worked to rebuild what had been broken, brick by painstaking brick. As weeks turned into months, subtle shifts began to emerge. We laughed more often, finding joy in simple pleasures, a shared meal, a walk under starlit skies, a movie watched curled up on the couch. Conversations grew easier, less guarded. Slowly, hesitantly, we rediscovered the rhythm of our relationship. One Saturday morning, she surprised me with tickets to a local art exhibit. I know you've been wanting to go, she said shyly, handing them over. Thought maybe, we could make some new memories. The gesture touched me deeply. Standing before vibrant canvases and abstract sculptures, we found ourselves discussing dreams deferred and aspirations renewed. Art became a bridge between us, a way to reconnect with parts of ourselves we'd forgotten existed. Another turning point came when she suggested redecorating the house. Let's start fresh, she proposed one afternoon, holding up swatches of paint. New colors, new energy. Together, we stripped away peeling wallpaper and sanded down worn floors. Each stroke of the brush felt symbolic, covering scars with possibility. By the time we finished, the house looked different, brighter, warmer, but so did we. Certain moments stood out as markers of our journey toward healing. One evening, she handed me a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside lay a silver bracelet engraved with 3 words, "Remember. Choose. Stay. It's for you," she explained, her cheeks flushed. "A reminder that I'll always fight for us, if you'll let me." I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist, feeling its weight settle against my skin. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a promise, a tangible representation of her commitment to rebuilding what we'd lost. Another pivotal moment occurred on a crisp autumn morning. Together, we visited the park where we'd met 14 years ago. Leaves crunched beneath our feet as we walked hand in hand, reminiscing about that rainy Tuesday afternoon when everything began. "Do you remember?" she asked softly, squeezing my fingers. "How could I forget?" I replied, smiling despite the lump in my throat. We sat on the same bench where we'd shared countless conversations over the years. This time, however, the air felt lighter, freer. As we gazed out at the pond shimmering in the sunlight, I realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, it was about creating space for the future. By winter, the frost outside mirrored the thaw within us. Our relationship remained imperfect, marked by scars that would never fully fade. But somehow, that imperfection made it stronger. Love, I learned, isn't about achieving some mythical ideal, it's about embracing the messiness of 2 flawed individuals choosing each other again and again. On New Year's Eve, surrounded by friends and family, she leaned close and whispered, "Thank you for staying." Tears pricked my eyes as I pulled her into a tight embrace. "Thank you for coming back," I murmured into her hair. That night, as fireworks exploded overhead, I reflected on the journey we'd taken. From betrayal to forgiveness, from pain to hope, we had traveled far. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, I knew one thing for certain, we were worth fighting for. We stayed. Not the same, not unscarred, but together. Our relationship carried the marks of what had happened, like scars etched into skin, but scars heal, and so did we, slowly and imperfectly. There are moments when doubt creeps in, when old wounds ache with remembered pain. But there are also moments of grace, of laughter, of quiet understanding. Moments that remind me why we started this journey in the first place. Maybe, enough isn't such a bad thing after all. Maybe love doesn't have to be flawless to be real. And maybe, just maybe, staying is its own kind of victory. And so, we stayed, I think sometimes, watching her sleep beside me. Together. And maybe, in the end, that's enough. Time has a way of softening edges, smoothing rough surfaces until they're almost unrecognizable. Months passed since the night she confessed, and though the memory still lingered, it no longer consumed us. Instead, it became part of our history, a chapter we both wished hadn't been written but couldn't erase. I often found myself thinking about the early days, before everything unraveled. Those memories weren't tinged with bitterness anymore, instead, they felt bittersweet, like faded photographs preserved in amber. I remembered the rainy Tuesday afternoon in the coffee shop where it all began, the way her laugh had filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. I remembered the years spent building a life together, brick by brick, moment by moment. But I also remembered the cracks, the missed signs, the growing distance, the choices that led us here. Acknowledging those cracks didn't diminish what we had, if anything, it made our bond stronger. Love isn't about ignoring flaws, it's about seeing them clearly and choosing to stay anyway. Her perspective mirrored mine in many ways. One evening, as we sat side by side on the porch swing, she spoke quietly about her own reflections. "I used to think love was supposed to fix everything," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "That if we loved each other enough, nothing bad would ever happen. But now I realize, love isn't about fixing. It's about holding on, even when things feel broken." Her words resonated deeply. They reminded me of something I'd read once: love isn't finding someone you can live with, it's finding someone you can't live without. Imperfect though we were, we had become that for each other. Amidst the work of rebuilding, moments of grace began to emerge, small, unexpected gifts that reminded us why we had chosen each other in the first place. One morning, as I brewed coffee in the kitchen, she appeared behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Thank you," she murmured, resting her cheek against my back. "For not giving up on me." I turned to face her, cupping her face in my hands. "I could say the same to you," I replied softly. The simplicity of the exchange struck me later, not because it was extraordinary, but because it wasn't. It was ordinary, mundane even. Yet within that ordinariness lay a profound truth: we were learning to find joy in the everyday again. Other moments followed. A spontaneous road trip to the coast, where we walked barefoot along the shoreline, letting waves wash away the remnants of past pain. An impromptu dance party in the living room, fueled by old records and laughter. Late-night conversations under the stars, where we talked about everything and nothing at all. Each moment served as a reminder that love isn't defined by grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It's found in the quiet spaces between words, in the steady rhythm of two hearts beating as one. Certain events marked our journey toward closure, moments that symbolized the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. One spring afternoon, we planted a tree in the backyard, a sapling whose roots would grow alongside ours. As we dug the hole and nestled the young plant into the earth, she smiled faintly. "It feels like hope," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "Something small and fragile, but full of potential." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Like the tree, our relationship required care and patience to thrive. But given time, it could grow strong and resilient, weathering storms and blooming anew. Another milestone came during a visit to the small town where fate had intervened months earlier. Walking through Maple Ridge felt surreal, like stepping into a dream. We revisited the hotel, the bar, the art gallery, places that had once seemed so distant yet remained forever tied to our story. Standing outside the venue where she'd met the Grim Reaper, I took her hand firmly in mine. "This is part of us now," I said. "But it doesn't define us." She squeezed my fingers tightly, her eyes glistening with tears. "No," she agreed. "What defines us is that we kept going." As weeks turned into months, I came to understand something important: perfection is an illusion. No relationship is immune to hardship, no love untouched by struggle. What matters isn't avoiding pain but navigating it together, with honesty, vulnerability, and commitment. Enough became a mantra of sorts, a reminder that love doesn't require constant fireworks or fairy tale endings. It requires effort, yes, but also acceptance. Acceptance of flaws, mistakes, and the messy reality of being human. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, I voiced this realization aloud. "You know," I began hesitantly, "for so long, I thought enough meant settling. Like, if something wasn't perfect, it wasn't worth keeping. But now, I think enough means recognizing value, even in imperfection." She tilted her head thoughtfully, considering my words. "And what do you think our enough looks like?" she asked. I smiled, reaching for her hand. "It looks like this. Us. Choosing each other, over and over, despite everything." Her smile mirrored mine, warm and genuine. "Then I guess we're lucky," she said softly. "Because we've got more than enough." Months later, on a crisp autumn morning, I woke early to find her already awake, sitting cross-legged on the bed with a sketchpad in hand. She glanced up as I stirred, offering a shy smile. "I've been drawing," she explained, holding up the pad. The image depicted two figures walking hand in hand along a winding path, surrounded by trees ablaze with fall colors. Beneath it, she had scrawled a single phrase: "Together is enough." Tears welled in my eyes as I studied the drawing. It encapsulated everything we had endured, everything we had rebuilt, and everything we still hoped to create. Later that day, as we strolled through the park where we'd first met, I slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Do you remember?" I asked, nodding toward the bench where our story began. She laughed softly, leaning into me. How could I forget? We sat together, watching leaves drift lazily to the ground. The air smelled of wood smoke and possibility. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace, not because everything was perfect, but because we were whole. And so, we stayed, I thought, glancing at her profile. Together. And maybe, in the end, that's enough.